Hey everybody, this is Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Today we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome. I don't know why I went up afterwards like that. Imposter syndrome. Full stop. That's what we're talking about today. I've been seeing a lot of things out there about imposter syndrome over the last couple of weeks, and I thought it might be time for me to give you an opportunity to understand what it is, to understand what it's not, and how to recognize it in yourself, how to recognize it maybe in other people, and what to do, just some rudimentary ideas anyhow, on how to begin to reframe those thoughts in our heads. Now, imposter syndrome is really important to differentiate from things like low self-esteem. Low self-esteem comes from real or perceived understandings of your self-worth. Imposter syndrome, the things that work to help someone with self-esteem can sometimes backfire when someone is actually dealing with imposter syndrome. So let's define it first, shall we? Imposter syndrome is the internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. So for instance, if I think I'm a great photographer and I'm very convinced that I'm a good photographer and I take pictures and I get people responding to me, if I have low self-esteem and I'm a photographer, people complimenting my pictures, people telling me that they like them, people hiring me to do different things photography-wise for them, that would be helpful in my self-esteem issues. Imposter syndrome, someone does something that they enjoy, someone compliments them for it. You don't feel like you necessarily deserve those compliments and you don't always believe them, but you believe the other person probably believes them. And you continue to get accolades in that area, then you're going to perceive yourself to be less of a professional or commodity in that area than other people think you are. And people saying you're good and people hiring your services is only going to make that worse because you're convincing yourself then that you've fooled them and not that you're genuinely good at something, because you know what's in your head and you know the doubts you have, so you can't possibly be that good, right? And then people will still think you're good, and then the fear creeps in that they're going to find out I'm a fraud. They're going to find out I'm not that good at this. At some point, people aren't going to like me anymore because they're going to realize that I'm not everything they thought I was. All of those thoughts exacerbate the issue of someone being presented as good at something, and then they don't feel like they are, in fact, good at it. So doing well in a field for someone with imposter syndrome is actually detrimental because it enhances the pressure to perform, especially when they feel like they can't. And it leads to things like anxiety, depression. You get worried that people are going to find you out. You become paranoid. You withdraw from people because you don't want them to know the truth about you and the truth about the person that they've put on this perceived pedestal. That also leads to depression because you are withdrawn from people. It causes problems in your relationships and it causes problems in your everyday operating life. A lot of times people with imposter syndrome are dealing with it in their professional lives or in their school lives and their outside of home lives. And so there is a little bit of a divide there when you're dealing with things like self-esteem issues. That kind of is pretty prevalent across the board. Those are just some of the differences between self-esteem and imposter syndrome. Neither are great. Neither are better than the other. But the handling of them and the dealing with them inside for the person who has it are very different. So where does it come from? People with imposter syndrome typically grow up in families that place a high priority on achievement. So even sometimes families that are like, all I ask of you is you do the best you can, a very well-meaning phrase and a phrase that I can understand why parents would repeat, makes a lot of sense to me. It can sometimes have the effect that if I don't do my best, then it's not good enough. And sometimes, a lot of times, it is impossible to do our best in everything all of the time. So you're always feeling like you let somebody down somewhere. That letting somebody down becomes a part of your psyche, and you assume that you're going to let everyone down. And so that, can you see how that cycle would then sort of snowball into imposter syndrome? People who grew up in families where the parents are dependent on a substance, where parents are dealing with borderline personality disorder or caregivers, strong caregivers in their lives, anybody to whom you would look to as a child to help you to affirm your sense of worth and your ability to do things, if they are dealing with substance abuse, borderline personality disorder, if you have parents or caregivers who often sort of fluctuate very rapidly between high praise and high correction or high insult, depending on the family's language, all of those things develop into this idea that I have to get my worth externally because my internal worth is garbage, but my external worth is based on what I'm doing. And I don't feel great about what I'm doing, or I don't feel like I'm excellent about what I'm doing, and I don't feel like I measure up to what you think I do. And so I am clearly the liar. I'm clearly at fault, and you are going to find out, and I'm going to be alone. We also see a fairly high rate of imposter syndrome within the LGBTQIA plus community because for so long, for however long, they live in a situation, in multiple situations, in lots of different environments where who they are may or may not be acceptable depending on who they're around. And when you have to constantly hide part of who you are, that becomes difficult to be authentic in relationships at all. So when you're inauthentic in relationships in general, that does tend to take a toll on your self-esteem. Where imposter syndrome comes in is if the other people believe that you're being genuine and that you're being deep and you really have a good connection, but you are the one who knows you're holding a secret. Why are we talking about this right now? Here's the deal. Social media has become, for a lot of people, an even larger part of their everyday life than it ever has been before. For some people, it's taken a backseat, and that's fine too. But for people for whom it has become a bigger part, for people who are, meeting with their families and their friends and their coworkers over screens, for people who are not getting regular, varied interaction with different people throughout their day and week, these people are getting most of their interaction with the world through social media. So Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, whatever the given preferred social media is for you, you are seeing pictures and words and thoughts and opinions from other people when they've had the ability to delete, had the ability to re-record, had the ability to just change it up so it looks like a product that they want to put out. And then once people are doing that, you are seeing their finished product and comparing it to your unfinished, messy insides. When you do that, or when you hear about somebody doing this, this, and this, maybe in the same industry that you are, if you hear about another parent who's doing all these things and you're like, how do you have time or the energy to do any of that? Because I don't. Comparing yourself regularly and also hearing that you're doing well, or also hearing that somebody thinks you're good at something. How do you balance the two then, right? So for people who are given to imposter syndrome or people who are already dealing with it, that's only going to make it worse. It's important to understand whether or not this affects your life. And if it does, if this is something that you deal with, it's also important to know sort of how to start to pull yourself out of it. It's not as simple as having someone say, you're good at something, because like I said, it is difficult for people who are struggling with imposter syndrome to be able to believe people when they say that. Here are some of the signs. A lot of them are internal. They're not ones that you can necessarily know for other people, but if I'm talking to you and you're feeling this, maybe this is somewhere that you need to sort of look further into. Number one, a perfectionist. Someone who is a perfectionist strives for things to be perfect all of the time. There is healthy attention to detail, and there is perfectionism that has become a problem in your relationships in your life. Okay. And I'm talking about that one. Perfectionism that's become a problem in relationships and life because you can't allow other people to be them, because them being themselves interferes with your narrative and it stops the plan that you already had. And when it stops the plan that you already had, it becomes a threat to you. That's where it interferes with your relationships with people, right? Trouble asking for help. That's another big one. Some people have trouble asking for help because they feel like they'll be a burden on people. That's a whole different situation. Still not healthy, still not great, but that's not what I'm talking about in this video. What I'm talking about is people who have trouble asking for help lest someone get too close, lest someone see the messiness that you're aware of or see you for the fraud that you feel like you are. That's why you have trouble asking people for help. This is a great one. Putting off phone calls until the right time. How many of us do that, right? Really quick, just a little side note. Procrastination is linked very tightly to anxiety, and all of these are pretty interlinked. And so I'm not talking about procrastinating phone calls. I'm talking about putting a phone call off, even a, hey friend, how are you? I really care about you and miss you phone call, until the right time, until you're not in a bad mood, until you have time to talk to them, until you have the energy to put into it. If you need to put on a front to make most phone calls in your life, that may be a problem. Things like fear of failure, also fear of success. So that's the double-edged sword, right? You don't want to fail because nobody wants to fail. But you also don't want to fail because you don't want other people knowing you failed. But you're also afraid of success because success means that you're just fooling everybody better. And then from that comes a tendency to self-sabotage and make something not as good so that people will stop asking for you to be good at something. If that feels familiar to you, lean into that feeling a little bit. Where have you done that in your life? And where can you maybe do better? Some people engage in downshifting, which is changing your goals to be less ambitious, because less ambitious goals mean less of you putting yourself out there. Less ambitious goals are easier to attain, and also you'll meet them, so you won't feel bad about yourself. Fear of judgment, fear of discovery, putting yourself down regularly, either audibly to other people or in your own mind, not trusting your success or refusing things that might make you successful, feeling inadequate, lots of self-doubt. These are all things that lead into imposter syndrome. So I have some questions for you to ask yourself. This is not something that anyone else is going to look at, okay? So I'm going to ask you to actually interact with this part. Maybe write something down. I'm going to give a little bit of a break after I ask these questions so you have a chance to sort of process them. If you need to answer them later after you're done watching this, that's fine. I'm putting them here. I'll also put them in the description so you can maybe go back to them. But these are important. So first, what core beliefs do I hold about myself? Second, do I believe I am worthy of love just as I am? Third, must I be perfect in order for others to approve of me? Now, I don't know how you're going to answer those questions. Maybe you're answering them in your head. Maybe you're dismissing them because it does not apply to you or because you're not ready to deal with it applying to you. All of those are fine. Y'all, you are where you are, and I'm not going to be the one to make you go to another place unless you already want to. That first question, what core beliefs do I hold about myself, is so key. And one of the ways to get yourself out of imposter syndrome is to become comfortable talking about your deeply held beliefs about yourself, okay? So that involves, number one, having people you feel safe with. I recognize the issue here. We're talking about imposter syndrome and then asking you to be honest with someone. I recognize that conflict. That's a little odd. But change doesn't happen without you wanting change. And if you don't want it, you don't want it. I can't make you want it. But if you do, if you're still watching this video, I would assume you do. And that's where these come in, okay? So finding somebody that you feel comfortable with to define your core beliefs about yourself. Sharing your feelings takes the power out of those secret thoughts. Finding somebody to whom you can say, hey, they asked me to do this and I'm really excited about it, but I'm also really nervous I'm going to mess it up. You don't need them to say, oh, you're not going to mess it up. You don't need them to respond with, oh, you're so good at this. You've done this a million times. That's not helpful. And if that's what they do, they're just trying to help. Tell them that doesn't help, okay? Just ask them not to do that. It'll be fine. Spending time focusing on others. If you are feeling inadequate in certain areas of your life and someone asks you to use that area to help them, focusing on them and not on the fear that you're going to mess it up or they're going to find you out does get you out of your own head a bit. That's kind of an in the moment kind of thing, but really focusing on the other person will take some of that pressure off of you because you don't have the ability, as I've said before, to do two things at once. That's not a thing. Assessing your abilities, really, y'all, there are so many ability assessments and talent assessments online. How many of you have taken one and looked at it and said like, nah, that's not right? Why? If you have a empirical test that is also proven correct for most people and you take it, just because the answers don't sound right to you doesn't mean they're not right. It means you might not like them. If you don't like them, that's a whole other conversation, right? Why don't you like them? Why don't you like the test that says you're good at X, Y, and Z, but you'd prefer to be good at C, D, and E? Why? What's the root of that? Small steps. You are not going to go from imposter syndrome to bold, spontaneous entrepreneur who's confident in everything they do in one day or even probably 1 week. Small steps. Recognizing when you're sabotaging yourself. That could be a step. It could be that easy. That's your first step. recognizing it, because until you recognize it, you can't change it. Question some of those automatic thoughts, that automatic response of no, that automatic response of someone else would be better for that role, that idea that there is something unworthy in you of recognition or of someone relying on you. Challenging those, questioning those automatic thoughts. Where did that come from? Why do I think that? What's the evidence behind my thought process in that? Those are all going to be super helpful too. These last couple are tangents I've been on already, so I'm going to try really, really hard to not. Number one, watch your use of social media. I love social media, y'all. If you know me, you know that I love it. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. I love it. But I also am that person that goes back and looks at my stuff and it makes me so happy. Like if I look at my Instagram, it's just these snapshots of times in my life when I was happy and wanted to share happy with the world, right? So they might not mean anything to anybody else, and that's fine because it's not necessarily for other people. I want to think that things I put out there bring people joy, but you know what? It brought me joy, and when I'm joyous, my joy is shared with others, right? Social media can be great and it can be terrible. And you need to know what kind of person you are and whether or not it's great or terrible or somewhere in between for you. Understanding how much you need to use it and understanding how much you need to share about yourself is key to your happiness with social media. Comparing yourself to others has to stop because you are not them and they are not you. Will there be other people who are better at things than you? Sure. That doesn't mean you're not good. That doesn't mean you're not worthy of an opportunity. Just because someone else is better at it doesn't mean that they're the only ones who can do it. That's not how expertise works. Stop fighting your feelings. That feeling inside of you that wants you to succeed, that feeling inside of you that wants to be really seen and really understood, stop fighting it. That feeling inside of you that thinks this situation is unfair, I don't deserve this treatment. You know, that voice when things are going badly and you push it down because you're like, well, life's not fair. Suck it up, buttercup. Stop that part of it and just feel that it's not fair. It's okay to feel like something's wrong. It's okay to feel like something's not fair. It's okay to be happy in situations. All of your feelings are okay. Give yourself permission to feel your feelings. Getting familiar with your feelings helps you to use them in a way that is beneficial for you and beneficial for those around you. If you recognize your feelings, if you recognize the things that are taking you into situations and that are sending off alerts when something's not quite right, if you recognize them and you embrace them and you work in them, that makes you a more integrated person. Your feelings are not your enemies. Some of your thoughts might be when we're dealing with this kind of stuff. Some of your automatic thoughts that I'm asking you to challenge, but your feelings are not. We push them down and we ignore them because we don't trust them. But trusting your feelings will go a long way to trusting yourself as a person. That's it for me today. That's the thumbnail sketch of imposter syndrome. If any of you have any questions or want to talk specifically about it, my link is in the bio and also in the description. I'd love to talk to you more about this. I hope you're doing well. I hope you are recognizing the places in your life where maybe you could do a little bit of stretching, a little bit of growing. And I hope you're recognizing places in your life where you're okay. I'll see you next time.